So today I'm delighted to be joined by Anthea Bell. Anthea is an embodiment coach to actors, creatives, and leaders. She's also a public speaker and a lifelong spiritual healer. Anthea believes passionately in the innate power of human beings to heal and expand and to grow beyond their perceived limits, and in the process, express the raw potential that utterly changes lives. So, welcome, Anthea. I'm delighted you're here. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, it's such a privilege. As you know, I'm often on that side of the camera, so it's actually really lovely to be over here in my cozy corner. Thank you for what you do in the world.
Well, thank you for being here. So, let's get started. When you hear the words, "Who am I to?" what comes up for you?
I feel I'm gonna frame it as a female experience, but I know that it's also across genders. I hear the collective of women who have doubted their permission to take up space in the world, to have voice in the world. I also hear echoes of my younger self who every time I encountered a big work push or a big opportunity for visibility or a big creative project had that inner dialogue that said quite literally that, who am I to deign to do this? Who am I to desire to reach a level of exposure that is before my time or before I have deserved according to the hierarchies that we so often live by? So I hear a lot of the struggle actually, and I hear so much of hope of where we can get to if we're willing to go back to deep intuition, deep knowing, deep sense of service, rather than looking for an outside permission statement to do what we know we're meant to do in the world.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's so common, isn't it, that when we want to see change, make change in our lives, we're always doing that. We're looking for permission. We're looking for the sign that says it's okay to do this. You deserve this. So it's about coming back home to ourselves, I guess.
Yeah, I mean we've learnt collectively, especially here in the UK, we've learnt a lot about how to be as safe as possible in society. We've learnt to follow the rules. We've learnt to look up at the ladder. You know, all of those phrases about dead man's shoes, all of that stuff that we are born into. And actually, again, I think as women, we've learnt to be timid and pleasing. And so it's a very bold, brave, radical thing to do, to state that your internal knowing is more important than your accrued experience of belonging conditionally. Up until this point, it's a huge act of bravery.
Yeah, it really is. I love the way that you worded that as well, then. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey and how you came to doing the kind of work that you do and the occasions when, as you went through this journey, that "who am I to" voice and how that impacted you?
Yeah, I'm really happy to. I think for the benefits of the listeners or the viewers, it's really important to say that you see a lot of us now in spaces of relative visibility, and we look as though this is how it always was. And the reality of my life, and I was actually writing about this last night, I'm kind of for my sins writing a book at the moment, and it's turning out to be the most, it's just, if you've never done it, it's the most amazing process. So much unearthing and gorgeous reflection and uncomfortable gold that's in there. But it means that I've been looking back a lot at who I was originally. And although I was described as an incredibly sunny baby, I had a lot of early childhood cumulative experiences that really led me to believe that the way to survive was to be meek and quiet and without need, and that life was much more about managing than it was about nourishment or thriving. So that "who am I to" statement, actually originally the way that I would have understood that was about worth. So it really would have taken me to the "I am not enough, I'm not loved enough, I'm not valuable enough, I'm not the same as everyone else." And probably that was the defining series of statements for most of my childhood, most of my teens, and actually most of my early 20s. And it wasn't until I hit 29, like classic Saturn return, I'm now 10 years on from that, classic Saturn return, that at 29, the career that I was doing very well in, plus workaholism, plus the aggregate of these years of working so much to an external metric, all of that culminated in me having some sort of very radical moment of self-recognition. I, as you know, Annabel, I, by that point, was at the peak of the second wave of anorexia that I had had. And so there was just this internal crisis point and a real crumbling of the rules and structures that I had lived by. And that gave me an opportunity to rethink everything that I then knew about my life and all of the metrics for success that I had followed up until that point. And I'd done really well. You would have looked at me from the outside and seen someone elegant and refined and polished and a great networker. I was a corporate fundraiser within museums. So my literal job was to create 6-7 figure incomes for the organization by virtue of my rapport and my talent at cultivating partnership. But inside I was hollow and broken, and my body was absolutely wearing that to the outside world. And so that was really what started me on this pathway into not just deep bodily healing. So as you said at the beginning, I'm now an embodiment coach. I specialize in somatics, in feeling one's feelings. So the aspects of kind of psychological and identity reformation, neurological rewiring. But it's really bringing together that body-mind piece that for me was so lacking. I lived in huge dissociation, huge numbing. And actually that I am not enough, who am I to narrative was underneath the surface all of the time that I was achieving. And I think that's so often the way in seemingly successful people, that the drive for success is actually really just a compensation strategy for the deep dissatisfaction underneath.
Okay, so you said one of the things that came out that you said earlier that really resonated was, you hit a crisis point. Do you think that is typical for people who really want to make changes in their lives, that they need to hit a crisis point to be able to do that?
I think that, and they know this scientifically, that the way that we create change, so change is a progressive mindset and action-based experience. And eventually it's more than just mindset and actions. It's mindset, actions, and formation of a new identity, ideally in a new state psychologically. So we'd be talking about what brainwaves are you using to create what you create in the world. It's even getting to that level of nuance. So what that requires is a deep, deep motive. No one will be able to change unless they have a profound, emotionally rooted motive that gives them the leverage every single day to show up to the mindset and the actions that they need to bring about the change. And so what I would say is you can get there through crisis, and arguably that's one of the best ways of getting your leverage, because at the crisis point, you cannot overlook anymore everything that isn't working. And you're given an immediate choice point. I could either continue in this way that I was, and in my case, if I had continued in that track, I would have died. And anorexia has very high morbidity rates. So I knew I could either go this way, and I don't know how long I'll survive, or I could go this way, which is terrifying, and I don't want to. But I know that offers a level of hope and possibility that is critical if I choose to commit to this lived experience. The other way that people get there, if it's not through crisis, is through a goal that feels important or beautiful enough or motivating enough that they're willing to do the hard work that it takes. And that would be the classic kind of, I haven't reached my rock bottom, but I've pedestalized the goal enough. Let's say it's to lose weight or to transform your life in some way that you think is really shiny and special and will create your happiness. If you're attached to that goal enough, that will also give you the leverage. But generally, because biologically we're more pain oriented in terms of wanting to avoid pain than we are gain oriented, it's just how we're wired as safety seeking creatures. Usually more pain is actually more useful at that point in time.
So interesting you talking about pain, because obviously one of the things that comes up a lot when people find themselves on the cusp of I need to change, but who am I to do this? This is when fears come up, and fears can manifest as seeming like a version of pain. So can you talk a little bit to that about, the fears that you personally maybe have had to overcome in order to step into the version of you that you are today?
Yeah, I think it's such a beautiful point and such an important question. And the work that I do now is very focused on high achieving, actually, in some ways, beautifully successful, quite visible, mostly women. And so they come to me at this place in their lives where they've already achieved a huge amount, but they know that and really desirous for the more that they can feel would be available if they could let go of fear. So for all of them, they are aware liminally of the influence that fear has in the background. It's like a kind of mist that sits behind the shoulders, and it adds this strain and effort to everything that they do. So many of my clients are actors, or they're in the kind of producing or writing world. And because they're facing the stakes of visibility so significantly, that fear is really understandable. The first thing to remind someone of when they're facing fear is that the fear is an illusion. It's a truthful physiological response, but it's attached to a very projected story. And that story really that you're projecting forwards of what will happen if I do this thing or don't do this thing is inevitably rooted in a distorted remembrance of what it was like before, and the visceral, often somatically stored memory of having been confronted with those fears previously. So it's useful initially when you think about fear to almost honor it by saying, I know that you're going to be here, because as soon as I push into my growth edge, fear has to come up because it's trying to protect me from pushing into unsafety. But I'm going to hold fear as though it's a child having a nightmare. And I'm going to lovingly welcome it in rather than trying to push it down or ostracizing that vulnerable part of us that feels exposed. So for me, I mean, I have had fear every single time I have dared to get bigger. And for me, getting bigger really was going from a place where I was emaciated. I was absolutely minuscule in every sense, physically and emotionally, and in terms of my identity. And I had gotten that way over progressive years. So I went from this place where I had no real visible presence inside of myself, no capacity to say no, very little capacity to understand what my yes felt like. I was absolutely a people pleaser. I was a chronic worker. So you gave me anything to do and I would do it. That was just the bargain that I had entered. So stepping for me into truthful self-knowing, into having my own opinions, into founding my own businesses, into building the podcast, into supporting the people that I do now, into all of the moments where I'm on stage or I'm speaking or I'm supporting anyone, those have all, at the first point, the first time I've tried to do each of those things, I've always been presented with a wave of fear. And the fear stories go something like, who are you to think that you can? What if the authority figures, because that's kind of how your fearful mind works, is you go back into the space of the child and you're imagining there's a kind of parent or authority figure behind you somewhere floating, watching your every move. And what will the authority figures say? Will they tell me that I shouldn't? Will my family reject me or get angry with me for being so outspoken? You know, I was taught as a child that it was showy to be showy. My father used to say that I was being awkward when I had an opinion that didn't go with the crowd, and I was one of seven, so there was a big crowd to please. So I think all of those things come up. And so if you can be holding the hand of somebody while you're doing it, and if you can say to yourself, I desire this thing and I desire the outcome of this new thing more than I'm committing more to my goal and my dream and my audience and my service than I'm committing to my fear. Because ultimately that's the choice that you're left with. If you choose relative to fear, you will keep going in the same way you've always gone. The fear will never dissolve until it's faced. The fantasy reality of the fear exists as long as you give it energy. And as soon as you turn in the other direction and you say, I love you, fear, I'll take you with me while I act in faith, while I act in leadership, everything changes.
I think that's so beautiful, the way you've said that. So I had the pleasure of watching Anthea in action hosting the inaugural TEDx in Richmond last month. And I just find it absolutely fascinating. You speaking to this fear and this desire to sort of shrink and make yourself as almost invisible as possible in every capacity, and just how far you have come to have shown up and to have held that space so beautifully for all those speakers and for all of us who were lucky enough to be in the room that evening.
It was such a sweetheart. It was the most beautiful event. I mean, I absolutely had a blast. And I think part of it, and it's to speak to what you're describing, is when I first started to look into all of this, which was a decade ago, it was born into me that each of us has a gift that we can offer into the world, and that the potency and the benefit of that gift for the collective is the most important thing always. So I always encourage really early on, someone calls you asking for help, you say yes. A client comes to your door, if you can help them, you will. There was this feeling of the more that I give, not in the ways I used to, not in the kind of doormat codependent way, but generatively, the more that I give and the more that I share of my heart, the better I will feel and the better the outcomes for the world at large. And so that carried me through the first few years where to be visible still felt absolutely terrifying. And what I then realized, and I think this is often the case, and I know that this comes up in the sort of work that you support people with, and this kind of movement that you're behind, is you start to realize that actually it's not that you don't like being visible. It's that you don't like the fear of what will happen to you by virtue of other people's opinions if you dare to be visible. The visibility isn't the problem in and of itself. The creation, the book, the film, whatever it is, it's not that feels risky. It's what will they think? So if you can meet that fear and get to a place where you're actually more generous in your expectation of what other people think, and you're also willing to find your innate value and motive for doing whatever the thing is, can really trust the ethicality of that motive for you. Like, it's enough that I feel like with TED, I was asked. So I'm like, okay, well, I've been asked. I haven't pushed for this opportunity. I've been asked to do this in service of the speakers. Yes, in service of the audience as well, but there are 11 incredible figures behind me that actually need a little bit of hand-holding to get them onto the stage. And that's my job. And if I can focus on that being my job, then me dissolves. My small fear dissolves, and I just get to go up and have a really good time. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And that was definitely how you came across on stage. It felt very much like you were just in your element. You seemed so at home up on that stage. And so this is one of the reasons why I think your story is so incredible, because, so many people talk about transformation, but you're actually embodying it. And, you clearly faced a lot of fears, there's been a lot of inner work that's gone on to get to this point. But this is what I think everybody needs to be able to see. When we're going through change, when we're going through something difficult, we need to see other people who are ahead of us and a proof, because that ego voice, the one that's saying, well, who are you to do this? The one that's bringing up all the fears, the ones that's trying to protect you, but in the process, keeping you small. We need that reassurance that it is possible. People can do it. And I think this is why I just love having conversations with amazing people who have faced their fears, welcomed them in, like you say, and from it created something really beautiful. And you're changing so many people's lives in the process.
It's really sweet of you to reflect that back. You know what I was thinking as you were talking, and I know that again, your lived experience is very much the reflection of this. I think we're sold this deep untruth societally, which is that people just arrive as the finished product. That there just happen to be these people that are ever so lucky because their mental balance is perfect and they were born into a high metabolism body and they naturally feel comfortable on stage, etc. And I think one of the biggest revelations for me, and it was around this time that I had my crisis, was I started to go to, self-development circles and retreats and holistic experiences. And I was in 12 steps from that point on. And I got the opportunity to hear with such raw honesty the previous truth that had been the existence of these people who were exactly the same as me. We were just as valuable, we were just as intuitive. They were people that had also gone through a horrendous rock bottom, but they had also used it as the turning point to work themselves up and out. And so I saw them, it's exactly what you're describing. I saw them in their current version, but had a vivid recall to where their life had been when it was most in the pit. So one of the dangers and the damage points is when most of us are in our pits, there's not enough healthy demonstration of that being normal and of where that can go to if you've got the right tools, the right process, the right support to get you moving in the trajectory forwards. And so instead what happens is people drop and then they're left down in the rafters because so much of their suffering is unseen and they feel so ashamed and timid to express it because somehow mental illness has come to be this thing that we deeply personalize as though it's our fault that we have anxiety, or our fault that we can't navigate our stress, or our fault that the body is now storing inflammation and even, fat aggregation because our life is so compound stressful that the body has absolutely no idea how to function. All of these things become far too closely tied to a person's identity, and they're not. They are baseline biology and nervous system regulation and contextual and trauma. And if you can separate out and you can simultaneously ask for help, then you get to the place that you're in, or you get to the place that I'm in, where you found yourself on this upward trajectory continuously because you've had enough hands and enough understanding at the moment that it was its hardest. Even when we're in our greatest distortion, we have to be able to know, me too. Yes, me too, I can recover. Yes, me too, I'm worth investing in. Yes, me too, I'm worth following my dream for. If not me, who else?
No, I agree. And I think as well, just the fact that even no matter where you are on your trajectory, every time you come up against something new, that old fearful voice, no matter how much work you've done on yourself, will come up in some form and it will have something to say and go, oh no, 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 go and hide. You don't want to do this. And yet, when we work with it, like you say, it just creates such a different energy within ourselves, within our lives, and just I don't know our potential. I mean, you talk about potential a lot in a lot of your work and just people stepping into that. And we've got to push through the fears, I guess, haven't we, in order to get even close to achieving our potential.
Yeah, I think you have to get very honest with yourself that the fear lives inside of you. You might think that it's related to what's allowed on the outside, but all that's happened is you've internalized that, and that's then become the cage that you live within. And so all of the while that you're living in either complacency or compromise or fear, and they go together, every time you're living in something that feels vaguely inauthentic, there is a cost. It's just that a lot of people have gotten used to numbing the cost, or they've acquiesced to the cost. And if that's the choice and you're consenting to that, I have no problem with it. If you found a place in your life where you know that you're not at your full, but actually there's really good reasons why you're comfortable staying where you are at that moment in time more generally, then brilliant. Where for me it becomes an opportunity or a problem is where people are not fully consenting to where they're at. They have found themselves in a compromise, but they've got another part of them that is much stronger, much more dominant in terms of its voice, that's constantly behind the scenes saying, come on, go, go, go. And if someone is in that situation, actually they'll experience a lot of internal conflict. They'll want to grow, but they'll be terrified. They'll know that they have it in them in theory, but they will have all of these limiting beliefs that stop them from moving forwards, and all of these genuine contextual fear factors of what will happen if. You know, a lot of the statements that I hear from clients now, because a good chunk of my clients have young kids, is like, my family structure will dissolve if I let my career get too big. So it's not that these statements don't sound rational, but they're not, because they're never based in reality. They're based in this distorted version of reality that feels quite convincing. And so for me, the most exciting people and moments are where you can feel that raw potential and someone's willing to turn toward what it is that has previously been blocking them. And then together we have the capacity to radically dissolve that and to then liberate all of this that they had latent inside of them. And you're right that every time they go for another big growth moment, they'll encounter the same fear, but it gets weaker every time because you start to understand the mechanism and you don't really let it overpower you in the same way.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. I love the idea of dissolving, all the barriers, self-created and just ones that we've inherited that stand in our way. If we go back to you and your story a little bit more, do you think there was like a specific turning point for you when suddenly things started to flow more or feel slightly easier as you were going along your sort of journey and trajectory of growth?
Yeah, I'd say that there were kind of two phases that were really significant. The first one is the less comfortable one. Actually, they were both pretty uncomfortable, but the first one was, it felt quite kind of dramatically uncomfortable. And that was that when I hit bottom and I went into recovery, I radically surrendered. So I talk about this a little bit because I think there can be this misconception that surrender is, again, a kind of passive and people pleasing. And I think there's some nuance and refinement about how we can understand that concept. What it was for me was this real recognition that everything I'd been doing up until that point, although it was my best attempt to find comfort or healing or whatever it might have been, ultimately the net effect of my identity and my actions had gotten me to that point where I was really at a very dangerous crossroads. And so what I decided, and this was based on consistent guidance, was that I had to hand over every major aspect of my life. So with anorexia, by that point I wasn't eating at all, and I had lost all biological function. My organs were in challenge. I had osteoporosis. Fertility was a question mark. Like, every single thing that my body would have done in a healthful state, it had stopped doing, because of course it was absolutely working for its own survival. So when you come in from that level of physical crisis, which of course is reflected in emotional crisis, you have to give somebody else the responsibility for every aspect of your life. And that is, for my first 6 months of doing that, that was terrorizing, actually, because anorexia is, well, it's partly because it's a condition that is so defined by control. So that was very hard, but it was also an utter liberation, because what you start to realize is that, of course, as you give over, you also give over responsibility. So all of these ways in which we take way too much responsibility as young adults in the world, wanting to prove and wanting to achieve, I handed all of that over. And actually, I ended up feeling a huge amount of lightness, even while doing these things that were so anathema to what I consciously wanted at the time. So there was a sort of flow in that, because I was just listening and following and listening and following. And then you learn to take the reins back, and you do that initially with supervision, and then, you kind of know the story. But then the next time that it really flowed, so let's say we had surrender, then I took back a level of responsibility, and then I tried to live as a normal person. And I actually, I did that really successfully. I moved cities. I moved from London, where I was born, and the kind of adrenaline of London is in my blood. It really works for me as a city. But I realized that the compression of that urban landscape was not ideal for health. So left London, moved to Bristol, retrained, built a business, bought a house, started dating, and I had this whole image of the kind of county wife, mother, dog owner that I would be. And bless my parents, particularly my father, he was desperate for that to be the case. Because you can understand from their perspective, they had seen this very other person almost hit the ground. So they really wanted for me something that looked soft and stable and comforting. And I, bless my cotton socks, I tried it for quite a long time. And it just wasn't me, and it wasn't enough. And I had so much colour and zest and desire and excitement and message in me. And I found myself in this very small feeling pond, thinking that I should continue to just be a really good girl. And so it was at the point where I was willing to let go of the good girl thing, which I had had as a child. And I had regrown in this beautiful, very genteel city where people logged into work at 9 o'clock, closed off at 4:30, 5 o'clock, and then went home and cooked dinner or maybe went for a nighttime stroll. It was so beautifully gentle. It was just too gentle for me. It was when I let that go and I really stepped into who I am, what I believe, what I'm here to do in the world, and I fully 100% committed to that. That was when I really found my feet again, and that was 4 years ago now, and I've never looked back since.
I think that's lovely. And what's really coming through for me, and I think is a really important message for all of us to remember, is when we are on a journey of growth and redevelopment, we can be doing really, really well, and making progress, but it's not always going to be a linear journey. There are going to be some things where we think we've gone down the right path, and then suddenly we think, oh, actually, no, that's not me. And I think it's very reassuring to hear that it's okay to try things and realize they're not for you. We don't have to get it perfect. I think that's the important message, isn't it? It doesn't have to be perfect. We adjust, we're learning as we go, and we have to keep on evolving.
Yeah, I mean, I think you just can't know until you try this road over here. You can't really know if that road is for you or not for you. So you have to be able to trust that even if it's the wrong decision, it will be an informative wrong decision, which points you to the right one. This idea that we can know ahead of time what the right thing is, that's purely based on fear. That's absolutely your nervous system driving a protective stance. It would be convenient to think that we know, but you'll know this. Even when we think we know, most of the time we're proven wrong. So you have to allow space and elasticity for life to come and meet you with an updated script or updated data. And so you can only live a full, expansive, growth-oriented life if you're willing to hold not knowing, uncertainty, fear, mistakes. You have to be hot-footed in life to be able to survive with resilience and healthiness. And I think it's actively unhealthy for us to not make space for that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I work, as with you, mainly with women, and I see so many people come to me, and it's like because they're going through so much, they need certainty of what comes next, but there is no way of having that certainty, is there? But I think it's really reassuring to see somebody, again, like I said before, that you've tried the things and some of them didn't work, and actually it helped you guide you back to your truth path was. And just so interesting that you found yourself repeating that pattern of being the good girl, fitting in, pleasing. Clearly there was a lot of joy that came for you from trying out a life that your dad was he was so invested in you having that life. It's yeah, these patterns are there within us, I guess, aren't they? But it's recognizing them and being able to catch them and go, okay, I see what's going on here. Mm.
Yeah, and you get, as you get older, it gets much easier to notice where you've slipped back into an older way of being. I mean, the good girl thing is, again, I think so many of us live within that much longer than we should. And we talked about that when we first met. It's not valuable, right? It's not valuable to be kind to people, to be giving, all of these things. I think where it becomes an issue is where it's become our way of creating social safety and belonging, because that will stymie fundamentally, it will convince you that if you were to be your full, loud, bold, brazen self, that would be dangerous and detrimental to your relationships. And that fear is big enough. Remember, belonging trumps authenticity. That was one of the big takeaways from Brené Brown. So we have to know that where your belonging feels at risk, that will bias your behavior and it will bias the temperamental leanings that you allow. So for me, the thing with my dad is I love him to pieces. But if I really sit back and I think about who he is and what he's demonstrated, my father, he became an investment banker in his early 20s and absolutely is a workaholic. And he lived this big, fast-paced, adrenal, international life. And he absolutely loves what he does. He's 76 and he still works 6 days a week. So he demonstrated for me what I could allow myself. He doesn't work because he has to. He works because he loves the game. For him, that excitement to get to the puzzle of the strategy that secures the deal. He works a lot with organizations to restructure now, and I can see his intellectual nous coming in. And for him, it's that field. And for me, it's, oh my God, if you and me, client A and me, sit down together with this dream and with this combination of blocks, we can work together to strategize the solution out and beyond. And then you can ripple out and impact more people as this much fuller version of who you were always meant to be. That's my passion puzzle. And that's more important to me than being tame and pleasing now, because I don't think that I need to be those things in order to feel safe. My safety, it's in here. It has to be. This is the only place that it's assured. It's the hardest place to find your safety in some ways if you haven't had that experience, but it's also the most reliable anchor and parent that you will ever have, is this body being vessel that you live within. And so that's an action of radical responsibility taking. I will not put it out there anymore. It's in here.
Do you think there's a point that you can sort of identify when you recognize that you really stepped into the version of yourself that we see today?
I mean, it's been iterative. I remember the point at which I knew that I was doing it and that I was ripping off one final kind of band-aid. So I had been in Bristol for 8 years and I decided to go on a retreat to Costa Rica, which I'd never been to before. But someone that I knew was running this very beautiful experience. It wasn't too expensive. And my steady, stable, housewifely existence in Bristol was running perfectly smoothly. And I was like, okay, this is a good time. This is about 4 years ago. This is a good time. I can make this trip. And I went over, and having planned to only be over for a really short period of time, I found myself just unable to and unwilling to leave. And so I traveled across to the States. I paused my clients for a little bit longer, or I switched them online, and I traveled over to the States, and it ended up that I was away for 4 months. And as I was booking my flight home, I should have booked a flight back to Bristol, and I couldn't hit the button. And I just kept on searching for London flights, and I ended up flying back into London, and I never went back to Bristol. I stayed in London. I sold my business. I sold my house, because there had been something so transformative that had happened for me during that trip. And I had changed, because I changed location and I'd liberated myself. I also changed state, and I didn't want to lose the new state. And so I wouldn't let myself go back to the place that I had learnt that state. And I forced myself to go back to where I truly could feel my heart wanted to take me, which was fundamentally back home. And that was its own kind of step. It was then that I incorporated the business as it is now. It's then that I started to get really active in talking about what I did. I've been doing it behind the scenes for years, but to really be expressing it. But the moment that was the biggest commitment was making actually a financial investment that I was terrified to make with my own money, but that I was terrified to make because I was scared that my parents would disapprove. And that sounds so silly, because by that point I was 36. They were in their 70s. They had absolutely no financial influence over my life. But it was this internal legacy of, who am I to? Because the way that I was spending my money in that moment, which I knew was the right decision for my business and for me, was not the decision that they would have advocated or made. And that was 2.5 years ago. And that moment crystallized in some ways my absolute independence. And I remember feeling sick as I hit the transfer button for this unknown future that I was committing to. But as soon as I hit the button, the nausea turned into giddy fullness and energy. I actually ended up having to go for a run straight away because there was so much inside of my body. So that's the one that really stands out.
I love there's two scenarios that you've just described so beautifully in answer to that question. One where your body literally would not allow you to press the button to book the flight back to Bristol. The fact that, obviously you work in somatics, but it's so true. The body literally doesn't lie. And when we stop overriding it, it becomes like an actual visceral response, doesn't it, to everything? And I just love the way that you worded that. And then also that sort of that visceral fear, oh my God, what are my parents going to think as I press this button to invest all this money? So I thought that was beautifully expressed.
Annabel, I was just going to ask if I could ask you the same question. The version of you that we have now, has there been a moment that particularly has really brought that to the surface for you?
Well, the reason I got into the work that I do, divorce was what brought everything to a head for me. That was my crisis moment. And my separation happened nearly 8 years ago. So it's been quite a long process, a bit like you were saying. It doesn't suddenly, this version of me you see today, me 7 years ago, me even probably a couple of years ago, wouldn't necessarily recognize her because, yeah, I've had to face a lot of fears in order to step into this version of myself. But has there been one sort of pivotal moment that has enabled me to get to this point? I think there have been multiple. I don't think there's one specific, but there are always moments where I don't have control over what's happening. My biggest fears come to the surface. My ego completely freaks out and says, see, I always told you you couldn't do X, Y, and Z. But it's when I face those things head on. And when I say that, I don't want that to sound like, oh yeah, I face them head on and then I'm fine. It takes its toll, as you know, when we do this work and we face them, it can be incredibly uncomfortable. But when we're willing to go towards it, that is the point when suddenly it's like a new doorway opens. That's how it feels. So, there have been various things that have happened since my divorce, and not necessarily things that I have instigated, but suddenly I sort of see, oh, okay, that's really painful, but it's opened a door for me. So, yeah, I don't think I have as clear a point as you have, as in, oh, I was here and this happened. But there have just been lots. And what I always find fascinating is just when you get to that point where you're almost getting to a point where you're feeling slightly smug. You're like, oh, I've got this sorted. Everything's going really well. That's when another tidal wave will come and go, oh, you think you're sorted? Let's just show you. And I think as uncomfortable as those moments are, those are the ones that actually in some ways I'm really grateful for, because they're the ones where it goes, there is no, you're not fully stepping into who you are yet. You're still hiding behind that mask to a certain degree. And it's those moments that, if you're honest with yourself, remove that mask, make it slip that little bit more. And you have to really, like you say, go back to who am I? Who am I? And getting comfortable with who you are internally. So, yeah, that was a long winded answer.
No, not at all, because you're beautifully describing the process and what you're also talking about there. What's indicated is to remember that you can only see what you can see from where you're standing. And so as soon as you change where you're standing, you'll see different and you'll see more. So it's like, as long as I'm living in this reality, I can only see a limited range. And as soon as I come toward, let's say, this new opportunity or this new terror comes in, and I then have to encounter it, and I then have to encounter my fear, but then by being with my fear, I then see the new possibility that emerges. Life is like that our lens gets constantly bigger and bigger and bigger, or more and more and more refined. And that's one of the things for people to bear in mind if they're beating themselves up for, if they do that retrospective, I look back and I think I should have known then what I know now, and I should have made this decision then, whereas instead I chose X, Y, Z. It's like you could only make the decision that you made then because of the data that you had then, the lens that you had then, the tools that you had available. But the you of now, in this present moment and moving forwards, can make different choices. We want to use our retrospective lens usefully, but not as a stick to beat ourselves up with, because that's not the goal. We've come to believe that the goal is to chastise ourselves enough that we change, but that's not how it works. You love yourself into change. It doesn't come through critique. We have enough of that. We have an entire culture telling us that we're not enough. I don't need it to come from the individual to themselves as well.
So your point is just segued beautifully into my last question that I wanted to ask you, which doesn't surprise me because you have that energy. You seem to sort of read rooms. When I've met you, every time I've met you, you sort of read the space. But you're just saying you don't want to sort of beat yourself up for having made the decisions that you made. But my final question is, if you could go back and speak to that earlier version of yourself who was doubting herself, the one who was asking, who am I to? What would you tell her?
She's such a puppet. I marvel at how much she was trying to do on the outside to hide how it felt on the inside. I just, there's something so kind of sweet and really sad actually about the level of effort and energy and her lens of the world, which was so convinced that she had to perform in that way. I think I would fundamentally tell her that there are people that can help. I would tell her that she's really loved. I would tell her that there's a whole nother way of playing the game of life and enjoying it as a game. And I would remind her that so much of what we grow to believe is not reality. It's a particular sort of shape of reality that's very convenient for particular people, but it's not objectively true. What you see around you as far as the possibilities available to you, you might just be seeing the aggregate, the convenient, the kind of mediocre middle place that helps society to function. And what you might not be seeing, because you're not looking for it or you don't believe it exists, is all of the nuanced, amazing, creative, beautiful possibilities that are here for all of us when we are truly open and available. So I guess I would ask her, what is there about you that you really have to doubt or criticize? What is so wrong about you that you don't believe that you stand a chance and merit the possibility of expanding into a bigger dream? And if you can get to the root of that, even for people that are joining us and listening, if you can get to the root of why it is that you think that you're so completely exempt from all of the beauty and the bounty of this world, and if you can dissolve through that and see that as an illusion as well, then what will happen is you will free up so much space and so much internal courage to just move forward in the direction that's already indicated inside of you. It's already here. You don't have to magically create it. You can feel it. It's our intuition. It's our guttural instinct. It's the move that we make automatically when we have a good enough excuse to. And really the only question is, can I let go of the things that stand in the way? Many of which you never created in the first place. You just grew to believe.
So beautifully worded and expressed. So thank you so much for that. I've absolutely loved this conversation, Anthea. It's been such a joy to connect with you and have this one-to-one time with you. And I just know that so much of what you've touched upon is going to resonate with so many people out there. So thank you.
I have absolutely thought it as well, so thank you so much. It's actually just so fun and beautiful to be with people that are in such a similar wavelength.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you so much.